Right, it is edit modal time. So this is a much requested feature for me to demonstrate with data tables, is having an edit link or button that actually pulls up a modal and you can edit a row inline, hit save, and everything updates. So we're gonna do it. Let's dig in, let's start. Oh, by the way, this is gonna be a beefy episode. It's probably gonna be like 20 minutes and it's gonna be chocked full of stuff. So I recommend that you watch through. Hopefully it doesn't feel like a fire hose, but there's gonna be a lot of good takeaways here. So, all right, so let's go ahead and add the field. We want this little edit button. So let's do that. So this is our dashboard blade view. Here's our headings. We're gonna wanna add a blank heading. So xtable.heading, and I think we can even just make it self-closing. Okay, so now we have this extra slot. Now we need to add that cell. So we're gonna scroll down and here's date for humans. Let's duplicate that. And then inside here, we're just gonna write edit. Bam, it works. But it's not a button. We need it to be a button so that we can click it. So let's make this a button. We'll do X button, and I added a new type called .link, which is gonna make it look like a link, but behave like a button. And we can say edit. Okay, so now we have edit and it's a button. We can click it. But it doesn't do anything yet. We want to click this and we want it to open a modal. So why don't we do this? We'll say wire click edit, and we'll add an edit method that toggles some backend state to show the modal. So let's do that. Public show edit modal equals false. So it's false by default, and then we'll add a new method that sets it to true. Okay, and then this show edit modal equals true. Okay, and I'm just gonna skip ahead and show you that I already have a blade component for modals, and I actually took it from Jetstream. I helped a little bit on this modal component, but mostly this is just straight out of Jetstream. If you go into the Jetstream repo, Laravel Jetstream, which is the new auth scaffolding for Laravel 8, by the way, and you click on modal, you have this really awesome blade component modal that uses Alpine, works with Livewire. It's so sick. It has focus trapping and like it's really awesome. It takes care of a ton of things. Beautiful transitions. It's all Tailwind out. So you can grab that from Jetstream. And then there's some other helpful like component wrappers over it. There's confirmation modal, and there's dialog modal. So I've already brought these into Surge, so feel free to take them and put them in your own project. I have modal.blade.php, and then we have confirmation and dialog. And then I have these slots, title, content, and footer. So let's just do that. Let's bring in modal. We're gonna use modal.dialog. And then inside of it, we're gonna have to add some slots. So name is title. And then this one's gonna be content, and this one's gonna be footer. Okay, and the title is gonna be edit transaction. The content we'll get to in a minute, but the footer, we know that we're gonna want buttons in here. X button dot primary, and this is gonna be our primary edit button. Sorry, no, we'll say save. And then secondary is gonna be cancel. Okay, so we have our modal, it's all slotted out. We didn't bind to any data, notice, so this modal is just gonna show up. It has nothing to do with our edit button yet, where we toggle that state. So let's just refresh and see the modal. Okay, so here's our modal. We can toggle it off. We can't toggle it on because it's not bound to that data. So let's bind it the way you bind any data. Wire modal show edit modal. Refresh, and now when we click edit, because we set show edit modal to true, it now shows. And it hides by default because it's false by default. So that's pretty great. One tiny little nitpicky thing, if we hit edit, it's gonna send a request to the database, because if you think about it, this is a very straightforward path. Literally, we have an edit button with wire click edit, okay? And that's what you expect. It's sending a request to the server to call that edit method, setting show. I don't know if you can hear those sirens, but we're gonna keep going through them. It'll make it more exciting, like we're running from the law. So wire click edit sends the request to the server, sets the piece of data as it comes back. Show edit modal is now true. Alpine picks that up, sets the modal, okay? So when we hide it, it's gonna do the opposite. It's gonna send a request to the server because we're doing wire model, right? So inside of the modal, when we click away or hit escape, it's gonna fire a request to set show edit modal to false. If we do this, It sends a request and that's that. But that's actually an unnecessary request. So this is just a tiny, tiny little helpful thing that I like, .defer. If you haven't seen .defer, story for another time. I think I demoed a bunch of .defer stuff in the Upgrade to V2 series. I'm not exactly sure. But we refresh, we hit edit, it shows, and now if I close it or hit escape, no request is sent. And then when I re-show it, defer basically queues up any updates for the next request. So that last request that I made both has set show edit modal to false, and then, actually set it to true. So if you're not following that, that's fine. You don't even have to worry about that, but I like to add .defer where I can because it saves on network requests. So, okay. So this is what we got. We got our show edit modal functionality working. This is all well and good. Now let's go ahead and actually do some stuff. We'll do some functionality, we'll make a form, and we'll do that kind of thing. So where do we start? Let's make everything really small just so I can get like some air in here and see, the lay of the land. All right, do we start by adding the form? Maybe we start by adding the form. Let's start by adding a title field, and we'll just get the form working for the title field, and then we can fill out the rest. So just like our other forms, we're going to use this X input group. So X input group, and then inside of that, we'll have X input.text, a text input. And input group takes for title and then ID title, so that, if you click on the label, it's going to highlight or focus text, okay? So we have for and ID title, and then what else do we need? We need a label, so this is going to be title. And we'll just leave it at that for right now, okay? We hit edit, now we have our title field. So our next step is we want to fill this with whatever transaction we hit edit on. So when we fire that edit method, where did we do that? Inside of button link, we wire click edit. We want to pass in the current transaction. So let's say transaction ID, okay? So now when we receive edit inside of dashboard, we can receive, transaction ID, okay? And now we can actually get it out of the database. We can say transaction, find transaction ID. Say transaction equals, okay, the garbage man's outside now. A lot of stuff going on. I wonder if you can hear that. You probably can't because I have a good mic. So everything I'm saying, you have no idea if it's true or not. So I could say ridiculous things like there's transformers outside and you wouldn't know. Okay, edit, transaction ID. We get transaction out of the database. Here's the question. What do we do now? So the easiest thing to do, the most primitive Livewire basic thing to do would be to add a field called something like transaction title or editing title or something like this, like editing title, right? And set that to an empty string, and then we would add editing status and things like that. And then inside here, you would do like this, arrow, editing title. Okay, so we could do that. But that we'll end up with a ton of boilerplate. We'll end up with like 5 new public properties and 5 new lines here, and it just gets a little bit cumbersome. So in Livewire 2, you can wire model directly to properties that are models. So let's just add a public editing property. We can even type hint it. This is the only form of type hinting I think I've ever liked in PHP, these new property type hints in PHP 7.4. I just love them. I think it just kind of elevates, like all the other stuff is primitive, normal data, but adding one of these just makes it seem like, oh, this property is an actual model, and you know what it is when you scan it. Plus you get all the, autocomplete stuff. So if you've heard me rant about type hints before, this is an exception of mine that I let it into my life, and I'm really happy I did. Okay, so let's set, so we can do this actually. We'll just do this editing. And even more while we're making, cool things, we don't need to do this and then this. There's a new feature in V2 where you can actually, if you type hint a variable that gets passed in. So if we type hint this, we now can just do this. This will just work. It'll notice if you type hint it and if there's an ID parameter, if there's a numeric parameter, it'll already do the find for us, just like kind of like a controller method with model binding. So just to kind of reiterate, we're passing in the ID and then we're getting it out of the database with this type hint thing. And we're editing this model property to that model, okay? So now this editing property, we can do anything we want with it. It's a normal Livewire model property, okay? So what do we want to do? Let's go back here. We want to actually bind to this text input. So we want to do something like wire modal editing.title, right? Okay, so what I would expect is that if I refresh this page and I hit edit, we should see the title in there, but we don't. So I actually ran into this myself when I was building this series. I went, why don't we see editing title? It should be filled in already. We wire modal bound to editing title and we set editing to a transaction. Why isn't it working? And then I went, oh yeah. So anytime you're wire modal binding to model data, you need to have validation rules. So this is something that LiveWire should be better about. Honestly, I should go and write some feature that detects if you don't have rules and yells at you. But check this out. If we do editing.title and then add some validation here, now we refresh and we show, then it works perfectly well. Okay, so the reason that it does this is a new version 2 feature that you can have these rules as a property. You can only wire modal bind to models directly. Sorry for saying model so much. When you have a rules array on the model. Oh my gosh, on the component. The reason being is because I need a whitelist of fields that you can modify. So I get them from your rules array. Basically, I'm doing this to prevent you from hurting yourself. If I just exposed every model property to the front end, you might have properties you don't want to expose to the front end. And you'll end up in a world of I don't know. It just seems like this is much safer. So that's a little gotcha. And really, I should write a feature in LiveWire that throws some sort of error that says, "Hey, you're trying to wire model to title." And actually, I think I do have an error. If you actually try to save that model, it will yell at you. But whatever. Okay. So we have our rules here. Editing title is required. And now we want to create a save method to actually persist this. So let's create a save method. And then inside here, we'll say this arrow editing arrow save to save the model. And we'll also do this arrow validate to validate the model first. Okay, so that's good. Now we need to actually run that when we click save. So you could do a wire click here, but when we're dealing with a form, I much prefer to actually just use like a submit button and to wrap the entire modal inside a form. So let's do that. Form, and then wire submit. We'll listen to submit, we'll prevent default, and then we'll run save. Okay. Refresh. Okay, we hit edit, and now we hit save, and presumably it worked. I don't know. Let's see. If we say yo, okay, hit save, and notice it did actually update in the background. And if we refresh, it is updated. That's great. We want to hide the modal when we save, so let's go ahead and do that. After we save, we'll say show edit modal equals false. Okay, edit, we hit save, and perfect. I'm really happy with that. You can change it and it works. We didn't tackle validation. If we remove everything and we hit save, we hit the validation error, but we didn't see it yet. So we need to add validation errors to the input group, I believe. So the input group component here, it accepts an error property and shows errors and handles all that for us. So we can say error equals errors first. This is all stuff from every other form in the app. First, editing.title. Okay. And now let's try this again. We hit edit, we remove everything, we hit save, and now we have the title field is required. We fill some in, we hit save, and it saves. Okay, so that is actually it. Like, we've done the hard part really right now. Let's fill it out. Let's make the rest of the fields and work on the rest of it. Okay. So we need a couple of fields here. We want a title field. We also want amount. So let's do this. This will be amount, and then this one is going to be status. Okay. Status. And then this one is going to be, what's this? Date. Okay. Now these are all text fields right now. If we click this, we have all our fields, but they're all text fields. They're not filled in either. So why don't we actually do that? Because we need to add those validation rules. So we have rules. Let's add amount, status, and date. And let's see what happens. Okay, great. So now we've filled in all the rules. We're good to go. We can, if we change 1600 to 500 and hit save, it now changes to 500. But we need these inputs to be better. They're all just text right now. We want dollar inputs, we want select dropdowns and date pickers and things like that. Okay, so let's do that. Amount first off. I created a nice little money input.money, and that's it. Here we go. Now we have input.money. Looks great, works great. Status. Here's a little bit, this one's a little more complex. We're going to use input.select, and then this is a select dropdown, and we want options. We want a value of something, you know, our different statuses, which are processing and open. Is it processing? And I don't know, whatever. Success and failed. Okay, so we want those. So here's another area. Remember from the other episode where we were choosing the colors for the statuses? We have transaction status color. And I said, rather than hard coding in all the statuses on the front end, let's isolate the knowledge of what statuses exist to the transaction model. So I'm going to take that same queue here because we could very easily create 3 of these and do like success and then success, you know? But then if you add a new status, you have to remember all the places that you reference statuses. And it's just much better if that stuff is isolated in the model so that it's all co-located. So this is just kind of how I roll. So let's add a constant called, this is a class constant, we're going to call it statuses. And then it's going to be a key value pair of the status and, or the status key, and then the status label. Okay, so this is status. What am I doing? Oh my gosh, you're watching me do this. You just sat there and watched me and didn't even say anything. So rude. Success, and this one's going to be failed. Failed, and then this one is, what's this, processing. Okay, processing. Great. So now we have one place in the model where we're referencing these things. Well, we're actually referencing them here too, but that's fine. It's co-located. I'm good with it. Okay. And then now we'll just for each through those things in the view. So for each app, modals, transactions, transaction, statuses. And that's our constant as the value of the option and then the label. Okay. So this is good. And for each. Great. So then we'll echo out value for the value, and then we'll echo out label for the label, refresh, and see if that worked. Great. So now we have success, failed, and processing, and it all works. So if we change this to success and we hit save, it works. Should I make this note now? Yeah, let's do it while we're on this. I have an extra note for you. So here's the thing. We are validating, right now it's just required, which is fine, but in reality you would have something like minimum 3 characters, amount like between something, or special formatting. Like I said, amount is one where I'm taking the contrived route for the demo. I'd normally have like amount in cents or something like that. But status, this is one where somebody could hijack the front end. They could add a new option called foo, you know? Let's actually do that. If we have statuses, let's add a new option. And what do we want to do? Yeah, we'll add a new option and we'll just call it foo. Okay. And now if we edit and we select foo and we hit save, we've now set it to foo, and we don't want to allow that stuff in. You want to validate that out, right? So inside of the validation, you would typically have something like this. In, and then you would specify like success, failed, you know, and things like that. And that would work. So if we try this, and now if we try to save foo, the selected status is invalid, right? But we want to drive these out from that one place in the app where we stored them, from transaction statuses, right? But you can't actually, like, I would normally want to just concatenate onto here, but you can't do that because PHP is kind of weird like that. I would love it, but it's dumb. You can't like wrap this in a function or something, you know? You have to put it in a method if you want to do that stuff. So for that reason, you can alternately use the rules method instead of the rules property and just return the array from there. So if we do this, we're going to return the rules property like this. We can get rid of that. Okay, and then now we can actually build up this. So required in, and then I want to take these keys and make them a comma separated list. So thank you, Laravel collections. This is going to be so easy. We're going to get the keys. And just to remind you, the keys are all the things we care about. Those are the values. Keys, and then we're going to implode them with a comma to make them comma separated. So now let's refresh. And if we set it to processing, it works. If we set it to foo, it fails. Okay? And that's exactly what we want. So thank you for going on that little journey with me. That's why I said this episode is going to be so beefy, because I'm just going there. I'm doing real stuff. Like, I don't want to just do a contrived thing that doesn't, there's so many little nooks and crannies of the Laravel experience that I want to cover, like in a real way. Okay. So that's our status select input. I'm happy with it. Now let's do the date input. And this is going to be another weird one. So let's start with just this .date. Okay. And we already have the date picker all set up. So if we edit, we do have a date picker, and that's that. But notice it's showing, because it's just a carbon instance or like a date time instance in PHP, and it's turning that into a string. So you're getting this ridiculous string. So we want to actually format that for pick a day so that we have a good format, like month/day/year, right? So there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. And I think this is something that people get confused with, and I used to as well. But here's my new favorite pattern. Remember how I said, like, think of the date property as this, as this pure value under the hood. And then anytime you want to access it, you access it from something else, like date for humans, you centralize the, I really have a hard time explaining this, but I think you get it. So date for humans is like a way of consistently getting a specific formatting of a date. And then you kind of leave the actual date value alone. And what that does is it prevents you from doing different date formats everywhere in your app. Okay, so this is date for humans. Maybe it should be called date for display. And then this date, we want to call date for, let's call this date for editing. We don't want to do that. Date. I want to skip that one. Date, no, not data. Date for editing, okay? And then let's go into dashboard, and we'll change this to date for editing. All right, now what did I do? Date for editing doesn't actually exist, right? So we need to make it exist. And we're going to do that with accessors and mutators in the model. I like handling this stuff at the model level. It's such a better place to handle it than having some like updated hook inside of your Livewire component that massages the formatting and things like that. I'd much rather do it here. So instead of date for humans, we're going to do date for editing. Okay. And the format is going to be month/day/year. Refresh, hit edit. And now we have month/day/year, and this is great, perfect. And there it is, November 14th. But check this out. If we change this, it goes right back. Why does it go right back? Because we can't actually set this property. We didn't do the setting story. We only did the getting. And because we're editing, we need to be able to set date for editing. Now let me zoom in here. So set date for editing attribute. And now let's get the value that we're trying to set. And now we just want to kind of do the opposite. Now we'll set date to a carbon instance. So carbon parse value. So the string with month, day, year, this is the inverse of the accessor. The string comes in, we parse it into a datetime instance, we store it in the date field. So now we have like a decorator. We've decorated a property, a carbon instance with both a getter and a setter. And I think this is a fantastic pattern that should be used for money and dates and anything else that requires a different format on the front end than it actually uses in the database. Great. So let's try this. We hit edit, and now we change the field, and it successfully changes exactly how we'd picture. And if we hit save, 11.06.219, there we go. We've just changed it to 11.06.219. And the formatting updates, I mean, come on. Like, this is some of the power of, well, I don't know. You could do this with Vue.js too, but to me, it's like you can handle all this stuff in the model, and Livewire doesn't even care about it. Like, you're not doing anything Livewire specific. You're just binding to data, which I think is a really, really fantastic pattern. Okay, so we have our form set. Do we need to even do anything else? I know there's one problem. It seems like we're good, right? Like we have, oh, what happened there? Maybe I need to refresh. Okay, we have this thing. Okay. Ooh, okay. See, perfect. I was about to show you an error that I know exists, and this is a symptom of that error. Open up the console. And we got errors galore. Cannot read property date for editing. So if I refresh, we get that error. Why do we get that error? Because if you think about it, our editing model we set when you hit the edit button right here. This is where we set it. But that's far after load. On load, we're actually binding to editing.title, and editing doesn't exist. It's null. So there's a few things we could do. We could wrap this entire thing in an if and say like if editing, but I don't actually want to do that. What I would rather do is something a little bit different here. Go with me. What I would rather do is set editing to a fake model right away. This would be like the null object pattern, but for models in Livewire. So let's do this. We can say mount this editing, and we'll set it to a new one, transaction make. So this isn't a real model. We're just making a new Eloquent model that's not persisted to the database. Let's try this again. We refresh. Whoop. Call to a member function format on null. So the problem is, here's the problem. Are you ready for the problem? This accessor, this get date for editing and get date for humans, well, yeah, they're both trying to access this date property, but it doesn't exist because it's a non-real model. So there's a few things we could do. You could add an if statement around this. Like you could do something like optional. And I wonder if this is the best thing to do. You could do optional, and that works. But honestly, I think what I would rather do, and you may think this is wrong, but I would rather pass in an initial date of just the current, date. And because we're passing it in to make, we need to add protected guarded equals empty array. Okay, that way we won't get a mass assignment exception. All right, so now we don't get any errors. And if we hit edit, we're working, okay? And then we get out of that, we go to a new modal. We don't get that weird open close stuff. And this totally works. This is really good, okay? So let's modify something. Let's say payment to blah, 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 blah. And we'll make this $610. And we hit save. And now we have 610 and payment to blah, 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 blah. And it's really great. I like it a lot. We can go, oh, we didn't wire up the cancel button. Let's make that. Cancel. What do we want to do with cancel? We'll wire click and we'll set show edit modal to false. Okay. Edit, cancel now works. Great. We are looking pretty good. Let's try it on a second page. If we go to a second page, we have payment to Dr. Cameron. Let's change that to Porzio. I can't spell my name. Hit save, and it totally works. Okay, so I feel like we're doing pretty well. I like where we're at. Our data table is good. We have our edit modal. Here's, you know what? Let's actually add creating in this episode. How far are we? We're doing this live here. We're 27 minutes in. Holy crap. We're going to do creating in the next episode. Okay, we're going to add a create button in the next episode with a create modal. Thank you for watching. Thank you for bearing with me on this episode. I know it was a lot. I covered a lot of ground. Step back. I don't know. Watch it slower. Look at the source code. Try it yourself. Sorry. This is one of those that I feel like, I could probably break it out into its own course, but I just shoved it in an episode. So hopefully you got the fire hose. Thanks a lot. Let's talk about creating next. And if you're stressed out by this, wait till the creating episode. It's going to be so nice. I bet it'll be like less than 5 minutes. I'm really excited for it. Okay, see you in a bit.